Who are hippies? The Merriam-Webster definition for hippies is a usually young person who rejects established social customs and who opposes violence and war, especially a young person of this kind in the 1960s and the 1970s. A new generation of activists argued that society could be dramatically reorganized by direct action. Protesting on the streets, they claimed, was a more authentic and effective form of political engagement than voting in the ballot box. Protests were very common during the civil rights movement in the 1960s. Many of the protests were involved in the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was fighting a similar fight as the USSR. It was a battle of communism between North Vietnam and Viet Cong. And later, the U.S. got involved in an effort to stop the spread of communism. Many Americans were against the Vietnam War because they argued that they were fighting another country's war and not focusing on American life at home. The protests involving the Cold War were mainly about anti-nuclear aspects. One protest was a group called Women's Strike for Peace. In 1961, at the end of the Cold War, about 50,000 women, brought together by Women's Strike for Peace, marched in 60 cities in the United States to demonstrate against nuclear weapons. It was the largest national women's peace protest of the 20th century. The protest helped push the United States and the Soviet Union into signing a nuclear test ban treaty 2 years later. One of the most well-known activists for civil rights was Martin Luther King Jr. At the time of the Cold War, American politicians were paranoid about communist spies. FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover was personally hostile towards King, believing that the civil rights leader was influenced by communists. Though some civil rights activists were aware that they were under surveillance, they still had to rely upon the Bureau to investigate racial discrimination cases. With this in mind, here's a video from Crash Course about how paranoid the U.S. was regarding communism.
The spread of communism, which was genuinely terrifying to people, and it's important to understand that. Like, national security agencies pushed Hollywood to produce anti-communist movies like The Red Menace, which scared people, and the CIA funded magazines, news broadcasts, concerts, art exhibitions that gave examples of American freedom. It even supported painters like Jackson Pollock and the Museum of Modern Art in New York, because American Expressionism was the vanguard of artistic freedom and the exact opposite of Soviet socialist realism. I mean, have you seen Soviet paintings? Look at the hardy ankles on these socialist comrade peasants. Also, because the Soviets were atheists, at least in theory, Congress in 1954 added the words "under God" to the Pledge of Allegiance as a sign of America's resistance to communism. The Cold War also shaped domestic policy. Anti-communist sentiment, for instance, prevented Truman from extending the social policies of the New Deal. The program that he dubbed the Fair Deal would have increased the minimum wage, extended national health insurance, and increased public housing, Social Security, and aid to education, but the American Medical Association lobbied against Truman's plan for national health insurance by calling it socialized medicine, and Congress was in no mood to pay money for socialized anything. That problem goes away. But the government did make some domestic investments as a result of the Cold War. In the name of national security, the government spent money on education, research in science, technology like computers, and transportation infrastructure. In fact, we largely have the Cold War to thank for our marvelous interstate highway system, although part of the reason Congress approved it was to set up speedy evacuation routes in the event of nuclear war. And speaking of nuclear war, it's worth noting that a big part of the reason the Soviets were able to develop nuclear weapons so quickly was thanks to espionage, like, for instance, by physicist and spy Klaus Fuchs. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Fuchs worked on the Manhattan Project and leaked information to the Soviets and then later helped the Chinese to build their first bomb. Julius Rosenberg also gave atomic secrets to the Soviets and was eventually executed, as was his less clearly guilty wife, Ethel. And it's important to remember all that when thinking about the United States' obsessive fear that there were communists in our midst. This began in 1947 with Truman's loyalty review system, which required government employees to prove their patriotism when accused of disloyalty. How do you prove your loyalty? Rat out out your coworkers as communists. No, seriously though, that program never found any communists. This all culminated, of course, with the Red Scare and the rise of Wisconsin Senator Joseph McCarthy, an inveterate liar who became enormously powerful after announcing in February 1950 that he had a list of 205 communists who worked in the State Department. In fact, he had no such thing, and McCarthy never identified a single disloyal American, but the fear of communism continued. In 1951's Dennis versus United States, the Supreme Court upheld the notion that being a communist leader itself was a crime. In this climate of fear, any criticism of the government and its policies, or the US in general, was seen as disloyalty. There was only one question: when will I be blown up? And it encouraged loyalty because only the government could prevent the spread of communism and keep us from being blown up. We've talked a lot about different ways that Americans have imagined freedom this year, but this was a new definition of freedom. The government exists in part to keep us free from massive destruction. So the Cold War changed America profoundly. The US has remained a leader on the world stage and continued to build a large, powerful, and expensive national state, but it also changed the way we imagine what it means to be free and what it means to be safe. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next week. Crash Course is created by all of these nice people, and it is possible because of you and your support through Subbable.com. Subbable is a crowdfunding website that allows you to support stuff you love on a monthly basis. Our Subbable subscribers make this show possible. Thanks to them. If you value Crash Course, please check out our Subbable. There are great perks there. And thanks to all of you for watching. As we say in my hometown, don't forget to be awesome. Wait. Stan, is that music copyrighted? All right. It's not. Whew. Let's save this $1,000.
The US realized if they wanted to be a great world power, they needed to focus on the citizens to move forward, which meant they needed to work on racial segregation. The USSR targeted the US using various propaganda. The picture shown is an example of Russian propaganda. The title of this piece is "In God's Country, That is the United States of America." Below, the caption reads, "The lynching of black men, the basest and the most abominable form of expression of race hatred, has thrived under the Christian religion, which exploits and is man-hating through and through." That's just one of the many examples of Russian propaganda targeting racial segregation in the United States of America.